say the road to hell is paved with good intentions, but what if those intentions were more sinister from the beginning? I'm Nikki P, a resident pop culture expert, here with utopian history expert Danny McCarthy. We're gonna take a deeper look at the sci-fi movies that we love and see if maybe what we always thought were warnings were really blueprints. Join us as we pull at the crimson threads in our beloved cinema. Welcome to the road to hell.
All right, well, welcome back, everybody, to the Road to Hell Film Review Podcast. This is, I think, episode number 4, if my counting is correct.
This is episode number 4.
Okay, good. My name is Daniel McCarthy, and I am joined by Nikki P., and we're doing what we do here. Today, we're going to be talking about the film Strange Days from 1995, the year of my birth.
It's not a Doors biopic, as you would expect.
I was confused at first when you mentioned it. It's like, isn't that the Johnny Depp Doors movie? Is that what we're doing?
There's a Johnny Depp Doors movie?
Well, he narrates a documentary, and I'm pretty sure that's the Strange Days one.
I'll have to look into that one.
Yeah. It came out not that long ago, like maybe 7 years ago. I don't know.
The Doors, mind you, getting into the history of the band and some of its members, I mean, there's definitely some tie-ins to the things that we would normally talk about, so.
That's true.
But we'll save that for another conversation.
Right, yeah, because we could certainly go fairly deep into that. It's a very controversial band in, I guess, alt media circles.
Absolutely.
But anyway,
when your dad's a general in the U.S. Navy or whatever it was, of course, there's going to be some questions.
Yeah, and especially considering the circumstances of his admiralty, like Vietnam War.
Particular Gulf of Tonkin. It is what it is. So. Anyways, I pitched this movie because it's an interesting movie, and it kind of touches on an angle that I don't think we've addressed in a lot of this. This movie could have been made differently, and it would have been a very different kind of movie, having almost nothing change. But the idea that this movie's main tenet is that technology is the drug really, really interested me. And to give people the idea, the basic movie is you got an ex-cop who is his life has not gone the way he wanted to for whatever reason. And he's now in a position where he's kind of a dealer for this illicit tech. And the illicit tech, essentially what it does, it allows you to relive, they call it the Squid, I believe it is. They put it on your head, and it basically pumps into you moments of somebody else's life. So you close your eyes, and then you just experience what somebody else has already experienced. And while it is just a very, simple, almost trite sci-fi movie in a lot of ways, there's a lot of really potent ideas in that particular framing that I really liked. So I really wanted to hear what Danny had to say on this one.
Yeah, well, definitely the drug parallel was, they didn't even try to be subtle about it, which they don't need to be. It's certainly come to pass in real life in a not so subtle way. The relationship between the way human beings interact with technology being a pretty tight parallel to the way they interact with drugs. The movie, of course, didn't, it was made in 95, and so they didn't predict things like smartphones or whatever we actually have, but instead I guess in a way they made the technology symbolically more overt than it really is. People live vicariously through fiction and stuff. You watch TV, you watch movies, play video games, and you could argue that you're sort of living vicariously through the characters. That was always something that I remember teachers, for instance, that's something they would say about books. You can travel anywhere with a book, that kind of crap. Um, this movie just said, like, all right, well, let's take that concept of vicarious living and make it literally true. And people become hooked to this idea of never really having to leave their house and just basically living other people's lives. And it's not actually like living the mundane parts of their lives. They live like a good 20 minutes of people's life, which is then put onto a disc and then you can just trade it on the black market. So like you can live a really intense like robbery or something. You don't want to actually rob anyone, but you want to get that experience. So you live the life of a robber for a half hour or whatever.
Or I'm just saying maybe something along the lines of like climbing Mount Kilimanjaro to
Yep,
reference another
exactly.
movie.
I know. I was going to say, you don't really have the right to your own personal experiences. And if the technology exists, don't you kind of have a duty to share those glorious experiences with others?
It was an interesting through line to me to consider like wow, like being able to live other people's experiences for yourself apparently has been like a big part of this for a lot longer than I've thought about it. Because there's a big year difference between what is it, 95 and 2017, I think was that when the Circle came out.
Yes.
So and they're still salivating over this concept, 20 plus years later.
Yeah, absolutely. The medium of delivery is slightly different. The circle is, slightly more realistic as to what has actually manifested because it came later. But I think the drive is ultimately the same thing. It's essentially boy doesn't having an animal flesh and body or flesh and bone body kind of suck. Gee,
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't it be nice if we can just kind of let the imagination take over and let our emotions be fulfilled without having to meet biologically necessary tasks? Um, that's what this movie really hits on, I think. And of course, it's no mistake that the surrounding world is a complete shithole. It's a totally dystopian society. No, it's not really clear anyone's running the show. There's crime. It's a police state, effectively. There are troops on the street by the end of the movie. But it actually went in a direction I didn't expect. Uh, and I like that. At first, I was kind of assuming that it would take the Soylent Green kind of formula where, you're thrown into this dystopian world and there's this strange technology floating around. And then at the end, you learn that, oh, it's this big corporation that's behind everything. And I was expecting that as the movie played on, we would get more about the history of this technology and find out that it's some grand conspiracy by some evil corporation. And I liked that it wasn't that. I liked that it kind of went in another way. Instead of having this really ornate conspiratorial formula, the movie was basically just like, no, dude, if there's a conspiracy, it's just the conspiracy of chaos. There are all these various interests playing against each other in a terrible society, all conspiring to make life more miserable for everyone. You know, there are these two cops who murder an unarmed black man, right? Who happens to be like the biggest rapper in the world or in the country. They murder him and it's recorded, unknown to them at the time. Then they find out it's recorded. They kill everyone involved. So that's their interest. But then there are like other interests going on, at the same time. There are all these parallel antagonisms occurring. And I don't know. I appreciated that it wasn't some tidy conspiracy, but rather it was
Well,
just chaos.
and that's a lot of what I like about it, because I mean, we talk about this as being like a drug. There's also a degree to which, like, we're also dealing with like a memory extension technology.
For sure.
I mean, it's like in one sense, the main character manufactured his own drug as he's reliving moments that he'd had with his ex, who now is with one of the main antagonists in the movie. They're he was just reliving the moments that they used to date. It's like, let's think about another perspective. Even something as simple as just like being able to extend human memory what kind of effect does that have on us? I know there was that Black Mirror episode where essentially everything that happens in your life, auditorially and visually, gets put to a hard drive. Think about all the shit that you like need to forget psychologically to move past. But imagine if there was ways to extend that beyond what was useful to you as a person.
Right. Well, and in my opinion, and I think it's probably on purpose. The like best character in the movie, as far as like on human terms, the best person is Macy. His the main character's buddy. She's like kind of the female lead. Um, she's
Angela
really
Bassett.
yeah, right. She's the best person in my
She's also
assessment.
the most overacted character in the movie. I love her
Oh,
to death,
yeah.
but God, she's pouring on all of that craft that she's got and
Oh,
theater.
and when it what you're introduced to her, and she's like kind of this bad bitch kind of
Yeah.
character, but then suddenly she's like beating up four dudes. I'm like, all right, whatever, but that's fine. I can accept all of the
I guess if you think about the kind of world that they're in and what she does for a profession, I imagine you'd probably have to be a bad bitch to get that job. I mean,
yeah.
like it didn't seem like driving around people at night is probably the safest profession out there. So you learn to fuck a motherfucker up.
I guess so. Yeah. So for people listening, she's a limo driver, which turns out to be a really high risk profession in 1999. What city is it in anyway?
I
LA?
don't probably I don't recall if they ever really said.
Yeah, I don't remember either. But in case we didn't mention, I don't think we did. This whole movie takes place like December 30th and December 31st, 1999. So as everything that we're talking about unfolds, it's on this backdrop of the year 2000 is coming and the world's going to end. You know,
Mm.
like that's sort of everyone's really high strung as 2000 is approaching. Everyone wants to party, but they're also kind of like, oh, well, this is the end of the world.
Well, this is the end of the world party. It's the idea.
But the what Maisie or Macy says regarding memory, because she's not into this squid thing at all. She doesn't like to be hooked up to this machine. She only does it once because she kind of has to for the plot to go forward. But her whole thing is like, look, memory is supposed to fade. We're not supposed to keep reliving shit that happened to us years ago and get stuck in that. She's like the organic tether. She's the only organic human being like still rooted to the ground in the whole movie, and that's why I liked her so much. Like she's this sort of beacon of hope, at least for the small circle of people that are actually in the movie. She's the like last real person.
Yeah. Well, and so one of the things that this particular movie didn't see is in a lot of ways this stuff does exist currently. I mean, look at your cell phone. The idea of like from a political level, the idea of how many videos have been caught on cell phones by bystanders watching somebody do something that they shouldn't, and how that plays into our society. Like you're seeing that in this movie. Like, oh, she just happened to have the squid on because she is kind of there to keep tabs on this rapper for the label. But how many people just I'm here. The smartphone's always on ready to catch the moment when a cop does something bad.
Right.
You
Right.
know
Yeah. You almost can't help but think of the sort of George Floyd type of thing,
exactly.
which is that's obviously what I was thinking during that scene. It's not, obviously in the movie, it's more over the top than in real life, but,
Yeah.
and, like this is the kind of thing that we deal with now, where a cop does something absolutely heinous and oops, the world saw, and in the movie, it winds up turning into this, well, it's interesting the way that particular aspect of the plot unfolds with the like racial,
Hmm.
the racial thing going on there, that's a whole nother element to this film. Race relations, black and white.
Well, and especially at the time period that this movie came out, obviously you had like the LA riots and all that stuff that was heavy on people's minds at the
Mm-hmm.
time, which we managed to forget about until the pandemic times again.
Right. Yep. Yeah. Well, the pandemic times is 90s 2.0. It's like a strange retrophilia. Anyway.
It's just
Yeah.
it's working us into the 70s 2.0.
Yeah, right. We're just going back in time. We're gonna relive all the terrible tropes of each decade.
God, if that doesn't feel honest, I don't know what does.
Yeah, homegrown terror. It's back. Um, that narrative is back anyway. But the I want to talk a little bit about the racial element because that's another thing where I didn't at the beginning of the movie I didn't really expect for that to be such a central pillar. Not that it's like beating you over the head with the concepts of like race and racism and stuff. It's just it's in there. It's definitely undeniably in there. And the Maisie character, she's a black woman, and her motivation is it seems to be like she's seeking some kind of justice because the main character, Nero, he through a long sequence of kind of cat and mouse, I guess, detective kind of stuff, comes into the possession of this tape where the police are killing this unarmed black rapper. And so,
Which he could have had in the very beginning of the movie if he wasn't a piece of shit.
right,
Did
right,
get
of
his car
course,
towed.
it's through his own character flaws that he doesn't have access to this thing when he was supposed to, which winds up getting a fairly innocent person brutally murdered.
So, before we get too far into the racing, I want to point this out because it's interesting to me. This is I would say, like a classic pulp sci-fi kind of story. Like it does not at all feel like on the surface like this movie was supposed to be kind of calling out all these horrible things in society. It's just kind of let's have a new cyberpunk movie is what it feels like. But you also look at the names that signed onto this movie. Like one of the one cop who does the killing is Vincent D'Onofrio, and I don't think he has two lines in the movie. Mostly, he said it was just grunting. Your main character is Rafe Fiennes, Angela Bassett. Like all of these are high profile, A-list actors in what is the most pulp of movies. And so when you mention the racing, it's interesting to me. It's that when they saw this script, are they seeing the same kind of things that we see, where it's like, yeah, there's the pulp narrative of this story where it's just like any other stupid 80s 90s sci-fi movie. But if you dig down into it, I mean, there's a lot of commentary, social commentary, going on in this movie. Like if you just scratch one little iota below the surface, you start to see.
Yeah, well, it was made in '95, and I think that if you were going to make a movie about, the looming end of the world, or at the very least the end of society, you'd probably say like, all right, well, what are the sorts of tensions that are closest to the surface in present day society that with just a little push would really bubble up to the very top? And I think race would be an obvious answer back in '95 and maybe now too, because they, like you said, they just had the riots and there was the whole OJ thing before that, which caused a lot of racial tension. Um, there's a very helter skelter kind of spirit floating through this movie where as everything's going on with this technology, the technology is itself playing an interesting role regarding like police versus black justice, because it is ultimately this technology which winds up in a sort of indirect way meting out justice to these two cops who killed this guy. So as
No, I mean it's absolutely it's that moment of somebody caught the cop with his knee on the guy's neck,
Mhm.
and once you get that out to the world, and the world sees that, then what does that become? Which is why like they're being pursued the whole time, so the cop knows it happened. He can try and keep it from getting out. But there's also the concern, where they've got to find the right person in the obviously corrupt police system
to get this to so that actual justice can be met.
Yeah.
Like, I think they're also trying to play it safe in that they don't like in today's day and age. I think the obvious answer is just get it the fuck out to the people as quickly as you can. But I think they're trying to like they thought that if that it was approached from these cops were on the loose, it would have started riots. It would have been the thing that really set everything off, because that's the feeling you get from this movie is the whole movie you're kind of waiting for everything to just fucking explode, blow up, and just kind of go crazy, and it never does. In that
Mhm.
very last moment, they've kind of got like their romantic moment by the car or whatever at the end, and it lets the tension off. But this whole movie is like everyone is under pressure from a million different angles. You know, like it's the societal pressure. Like Angela Bass's character's got kids, and she's like afraid. She's afraid of this, drug technology, that whatever it is, that he's gonna corrupt her kids, and she doesn't want them living in that world because she's seen what this kind of living did to her husband and that kind of shit. So it's definitely interesting looking at the parallels and how you can kind of pour on and let off the gas with a society depending on how things just come out and who gets that information and when.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that maybe this is maybe it's more than slightly an oversimplification, but the basic idea of that the movie, as I saw it, was trying to get across was essentially technologies turning the entirety of society into junkies. And as they become junkies, the society around them falls apart because no one's taking care of it. And in that chaos that will naturally arise, all of the tensions that people have been either trying desperately to just barely scrape by and not have come to fruition, or people have been ignoring, all of those tensions are just going to eventually bubble up, and there's going to be chaos in the streets because no one's paying attention anymore. And by the way, all throughout this whole thing, people are going to be chasing after some kind of forgotten, long lost, idealized past, which will
Mm-hmm.
never be realized again because they're trying to realize it through technological means. By the way, the ex of the main character's name is Faith, and she's lost. Like she's lost to him. She's a fallen woman. She's
I
like
leave
this.
it to you, buddy. You're the one that sees all this.
She's is Juliette Lewis, the daughter from Griswold Christmas Vacation. That's how I'll always know her. But
Okay.
she's she's his ex, but she's this like cigarette smoking punk rock kind of singer in this like really dirty, gritty music scene. She's hanging out with this record label guy who's a complete junkie on this technology, a real shitty dude. Um, and so
Did you
that's
ever
Faith.
did you ever play the game Cyberpunk?
No.
So I mean, I'm talking the pen and paper RPG type. Me and my buddies used to play in high school and stuff, and eventually they made a video game version of it. I think that was one of the most hyped video games of the past decade that came out with a lot of bugs because that's what AAA gamers do these days. The reason I asked is, I mean, this movie it is like the classic '90s cyberpunk setting. I mean, all of this stuff has been talked about in movie after movie. Like the '90s was a big conversation. Um, did you notice who the director was for this?
No, I missed it.
So I did some research on that because it amused me. It was a woman, first off, and I found that to be interesting on a couple levels. And then digging a little deeper on this particular director, it's James Cameron's wife.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I want you to take that and think of who James Cameron is and what James Cameron has produced over the years, and think that this is what his wife was making.
Jeez. That's really interesting, actually. What else? Has she done anything else along these lines?
I didn't look and see everything she'd ever did. She doesn't have as many credits as he does. Um, and she's got pretty well-rounded credits from what I could actually see.
Mhm.
But yeah, that was interesting to me because it's obviously James Cameron, who's a guy who's always kind of been on the forefront of technology, and he's the Terminator guy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's these people clearly were in that whole cyberpunk milieu. So I want to know which of the guys like the Kurzweil types that we know were they around that was feeding them these ideas? Because so much of this is like when you start seeing like, oh, well, they're connected to them. Well, I know they're connected to the so and so here.
Yeah.
But that's where you start getting outside of my depth. Like I know this movie because I love this stuff as a kid, but the historical tendrils, like where does that go from there?
Right. Now I'm wishing I got more into that element of it.
I mean, there's
Like,
enough interesting things in the movie itself to talk about. Like you don't have to go that route, but it was something that like I'm watching like who did this because this is a very who had the ability to get that type of cast on what should have been just like a B flick,
right.
and that's what set me down that path. And I'm like, I don't know this director, and like, oh, oh, that makes that part make more sense. Well, yeah, it was definitely a path I want to look down in the future, but
Mhm. Yeah,
so
for sure. Um, and I don't know what this woman's, personal views on technology are, but there is, despite the overt kind of critique maybe of cyber culture that the movie provides, obviously, junkie isn't quite a great look. I did, and maybe this is my own kind of like conspiratorial mindset shining through, but as I watched the movie, I couldn't help but think, maybe it's not so much a criticism of the technology. Maybe all this chaos and terrible, maybe the dystopian conditions of this world aren't in the film's presentation so much the result of the technology itself, but rather man's inability to rise to the occasion of dealing with high
oh,
technology.
so even more interesting. Catherine Bigelow is the director.
Okay.
The story was actually James Cameron.
Oh no. Well. Okay. Okay. Well, this is big news. So this is like 4 years after Terminator 2, you know, one of the greatest movies ever made.
Yeah.
So there's like Terminator, you don't really, or I didn't get this sense that I got with Strange Days, that it's like, why is the technology causing so much trouble? Is it the tech or is it human beings? And the movie kind of leaves that question unanswered. However, however, as the whole movie is kind of overtly telling you, oh, this technology is really dangerous. Oh, this is really bad. At the end, the technology winds up being that medium through which justice is delivered. It's because of this recording technology, and it's because people are able to capture moments that ultimately the cops, the bad cops, are arrested and then, eventually brutally killed by, well, one by himself and the other by the rest of the cops. Um, and so it's like in the real world, it's like we're confronted with this problem where, on the one hand, this all pervasive technology is dangerous and addictive, and it's melting our brains and turning them into tapioca. But on the other hand, well, the world sees George Floyd get killed. And well, isn't that a good thing that this kind of thing that would have once happened in the dark is now being brought to light and all this stuff? Kind of like in The Circle, where he's like, oh, well, we can track down this murderer. Isn't that good? So the film leaves it on that note. The whole thing is like tech equals bad until the very end. It's like, but wait, maybe not. And then it's over.
So I'm looking at her. There's some interesting things that in here. I think the first thing I see her at that was like real big. She directed Point Break.
Oh, okay.
The Hurt Locker is she did. Also, Zero Dark 30, which, if I remember correctly, Zero Dark 30 like won a ton of awards.
That's the Bin Laden one, right? I never saw it, but I'm pretty sure that's the like
If it
movie.
had shit to do with war, I didn't care. War's bad.
Right.
As far as I need to go with it. But what was really interesting here is, especially considering the content of what this movie is about and the parallels that I know you and I would draw. In 2021, she did a video short, Apple iPhone 13 Pro, Hollywood in Your Pocket.
Oh man. Okay. All right. We're in business now. Okay. That's really interesting for a number of reasons. First of all, being that just the obvious corporate connection that this person obviously has, Apple. My memory is immediately throwing up the 1984 Apple Macintosh commercial. The idea that Apple is supposed to be like the sort of renegade tech company, but of course, it's really seems to be the biggest one that's making this technology so ubiquitous. It popularized the idea of carrying around a computer in your pocket. It made it accessible to most people, and it made it stylish, right? It kind of removed technology from the arcane world of coding and made it into an aesthetically pleasing, simple, ubiquitous medium for your average person to interface with. It's really interesting that she'd be making videos, ostensibly commercials, it sounds like, promoting this product, which is kind of the real life version of the terrible Squid technology in this movie.
Well, what's funny is that, so we're looking at the Squid technology as being a terrible thing. But to me, the most analogous thing to it is it's the feed of what people choose to put out of their lives. There's the element of, what moments are you going to choose to wear the Squid for? You're going to want to show off your life. You want to live the good life. And so I'm just thinking about, like, if the only moments that you keep are the ones worth remembering for some reason or another, what does that do to the psyche of people? And what is, if you go down the path of looking at, well, if these are the moments I'm keeping, what's with all the other moments of my life? What are they worth next to these moments? Everybody does that to themselves. Everyone does it. I mean, I'm just thinking, the fake persona. We talked about it in the circle that everyone lives and puts out into the real world. This is kind of like precursoring that and saying, like, well, they're kind of calling the thing that is everything that we do in daily life a drug.
Yeah.
That's the way it's treated.
Right. Everything that's not being recorded is, I guess, prep time for when you are recording, because everything is about tailoring a certain kind of experience, which, again, like you said, we saw in the circle. The subject, the person making the recording, is knowingly doing so for an audience. And it's kind of like the Snapchat filter or the Instagram story thing or whatever it's called, where you basically edit a portion of your own life and then make it accessible to the masses, which gives this, I guess, false sense of reality, really, where, life is something that can be perfectly tailored and made to be inorganic and synthetic, but perfect, because all of the fluff and all of the stuff is cut out of it. And whatever the purest form of the experience desired is, it's captured technologically.
Just keep going. Ignore them.
All right. But I'm also interested to find that this, the director woman, you said before the Apple commercial, she was involved with some military movies. That intrigues me because I think we all are well aware of the fact that the Defense Department, the Pentagon, and intelligence agencies, they often fund movies and will even have agents, for lack of a better term, work on films and approve what gets put out, and they will advise what ought to be, how a storyline ought to be presented and how certain materials and technology ought to be presented. So that right there indicates that, at least later on in her career, there's almost unavoidably some connection with literal government agencies. I don't think you could make a high budget military film without having some army dudes standing over your shoulder. Like, that's not a thing.
Well, and we know James Cameron has that in his past as well.
Right.
If I remember correctly, isn't there like stories about James Cameron's house, where it's like the most insane place in the world, like everything in it is it's all next generation centralized control, like the smart house times 1,000 or some shit.
Jeez. See, it's that kind of thing that makes me wonder when I watch a movie like this, like, okay, but they're presenting the tech in a somewhat bad light. In fact, if I were just like the average viewer, I would kind of just interpret this as like a anti-tech movie almost, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Beware. But then you dig into what these people are actually doing, and they're super pro this exact technology.
And what is the core thesis of our show? It's like, you watch this stuff on the surface, it comes across as a warning, but then inevitably we end up going down the path.
Right.
And strangely enough, those people that have been warning us about it always seem to be connected at the far end of things too. I mean, we'll talk about like this. This is all kind of like part of the cyberpunk movement, and all of those cyberpunks were all really, really interested in cybernetics.
Yeah, big time.
And you look at the think tanks and the government organizations that kind of got blossomed out of that world, and then where we end up now, we end up with the Klaus Schwabs. We end up with just the entire transhumanist movement. Like this is a fairly early peek, I guess, at some of the stuff that was going to come. But when we were talking about crafting lives, we haven't really talked about the rape murder like thing that was going on with obviously it's supposed to be his best buddy in the movie who actually is fucking around with him, and he's the one that's actually been killing strippers or prostitutes, right, and kind of leading him on this wild goose hunt. What are your thoughts on kind of like that instinct or that desire that someone would have to kind of push this kind of technology in that direction?
Well, I think that's probably an inevitability, because that's just what people do. You find the most extreme and arcane possible use of a tool and do it and apply it that way.
I mean, I'm in Cleveland here. We had a couple years ago, the Facebook Live killer dude just Facebook Live himself murdering somebody.
Right. That's what people are going to do.
And so, like, we're sitting here recording this as Elon Musk just bought Twitter, and free speech and what people are allowed to say, content moderation is a big conversation everyone's having. And they were looking at it as like a peer-to-peer sense, but what the technology ends up being used for is more of a broadcasting sense. Right.
And when somebody in power, I use the term loosely because a killer, maybe he doesn't necessarily possess political power, although maybe he does. Yeah. But even when he doesn't, it's like, all right, well, this person is still exercising literal power when they're doing what they do, that is killing. And so when a person is willing to exercise extreme power and then broadcast it, I think that's going to have an unavoidable effect on people in general. And now whether that is like a sort of programming effect to get people to want to mimic that sort of behavior, or whether it's a kind of aversion that occurs where people are like, oh, that's terrible, I want to stay away. Either way, it's going to affect individuals. But this is a debate that's been raging for decades regarding violent movies, violent television shows, and now, of course, violent video games. Is this playing Grand Theft Auto, is this going to encourage children to be more violent, or is it going to be an outlet so they become less violent? And this is something that the main character talks about in the movie before the whole like rape murder thing happens. Before it gets too extreme, he's like, no, this technology is great because it allows people to like live the life of a murderer without actually murdering someone. And so whatever animal impulses they may have, well, okay, that's satisfied now. They can go about their normal lives. Of course, meanwhile, society is collapsing. It's like, it seems like maybe that's not actually what's happening. It seems like people are just getting those rushes of emotions and then living in that fictional world rather than this idea, this almost myth of the outlet for negative urges. And I go back and forth on this because, well, I'm not like someone who wants to censor violent media necessarily. Not at all. And yet I'm not entirely convinced that, if we just gave everyone violent video games, society would kind of clean itself up. And, in this movie, we're presented with this problem.
Well, by the numbers, I mean, how many Call of Duty games are out there now?
Oh, I don't even know.
Where's murder? Is it on the positive or negative?
Well, not counting COVID stuff, I think it's down.
Very, very negative. Now, is that standard of living type down, or what causes that? Who knows? What was I going to say there? There was a thought I had. Oh, it's interesting to me that it seems like we have all this technology that allows us to kind of dig in, find more of the reality of life. And we have more vision and more visibility than we've ever had before. But the more ability we have to see into and inspect life, the more fake life becomes.
Yeah.
And that's because we approach everything with an editor's mindset. No one wants to be transparent. And so all we can do is make life more fake by trying to capture more of it. I mean, and I don't know if that's necessarily any different than it ever was. I mean, you write an autobiography, you keep the good shit, leave out the bad shit. But because it's so visceral, being auditory and visual nowadays, is it more affecting than it used to be in the past?
I think probably, because the audio and the visual are affecting systems in the body and in the brain and the mind that are not explicit or like immediately conscious systems.
Like
flashing
more
lights.
Of a feeling of being with that person or whatever it is, whatever story narrative that used to be a good story, you could kind of trick yourself into believing for a little while. We're almost in the opposite, where you have to remind yourself that this isn't real.
Yeah. And in the movie, whenever people go into the Squidverse, they're except for people who are like veteran users who kind of have built up a tolerance, it's like using heroin. It's like people, their eyes roll back and they're completely immersed in the experience. So that suggests that this is having some like mental and physiological effects on the individual that aren't just like reading a book where you can be very soberly considering what you're reading. This is a hypnotic state that people are being washed with, essentially. And, we know that looking at flashing lights and screens and stuff and listening to certain frequencies lulls people.
Your binaural beats. And
Right. You get lulled into certain states. And so that's why I think that this technology that we're confronted with now, audio and visual, it can't help but be more affecting because it's playing to systems in the body that we're not even consciously aware of their behavior. We don't know. We don't know what the hell this stuff's doing to us.
God, I just had another thought that was real interesting to me, and it slipped away. Terrible.
It's a damn shame. If only you were recording your life at the time, we could go back and pull
apparently not, because apparently I was actually be recording my thoughts at the time.
That's right.
We're not there
one day.
yet.
Give it time.
Well, and yeah, how much different is the Neuralink from the Squid? Like, none of this technology is not happening. So I guess that was the big thing. So as we're talking about, we haven't talked about the living the other experience. I had you watch that James Corbett documentary on transhumanism.
Hmm.
What is the first video? He shows the noob in the movie to get him hooked. What is he watching and experiencing there?
Oh, geez, I don't remember. I don't remember. I have to go back and watch it.
You're an 18-year-old girl in the shower. Like he hands it to this. I would assume probably a banker or some shit. Some guy in finance, and a man, and the first thing he hands them is this ability to step into the body of a young girl.
Yes, you're right. You're right. It's a lawyer. The lawyer with the tassel shoes.
Yes.
Right. He puts. Jesus. Right. Of course. Look at the internet is this wonderful tool. Sure. But like, what is it primarily? It's a porn medium.
Well, I mean, most of us have joked for a long time that like what really drives technology is the porn industry.
Oh yeah.
The more realistic you can make porn, the better off. Well, and it's amusing as you look at like, was it Kurzweil the one who like was really, really into like a lot of the sexual stuff in the in that whole movement, and these they're having all these big. His whole thing was the ability to like be non-gendered is one of the goals of all of this.
Yeah, well, I've got a book back there by Ray Kurzweil called "The Age of the Spiritual Machine," and in that it's like goes beyond lust for this guy. It goes beyond satisfying base animal instincts. He says that there's coming a time where technology and AI will become so sophisticated that your computer essentially will be able to actually know you better than any other human being possibly could. It'll know everything about you. And so, because of that, we're approaching an age where the only possible way for a human being to ever experience true love will be to fall in love with their computer, essentially. Because who else knows you that well? It's the only thing that you can truly have a connection with. So this dude's talking about falling in love.
Let's just address is a very modern concept. The whole fucking idea of true love. I'm more of a perfunctory love kind of person. But the idea, I mean, that's what, only 200 years old, the idea of quote unquote falling in love. Everything in history has been arranged marriages other than that.
Yeah.
So I guess that almost speaks to how quickly new ideas can like push society. That's how quickly. So we went from the idea of true love to eventually, oh, well, the only person who's ever going to be able to truly love you is your computer. Now, mind you, we've definitely crossed the Rubicon on computers knowing you better than you know yourself. I mean, we've all heard stories about like the young teenage girl who getting the advertisements for diapers before she realizes she's pregnant.
Right, of course.
Shit like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that part of things has actually kind of already come to pass. I guess maybe there's a certain degree of how much do you give into it that we need to address.
Right. Well, and the world that I live in is me and people like me who are fairly resistant to this sort of thing and aren't like eager to sign up for every new thing. But I've encountered people out there, and it's always surreal for me because I forget that these people actually exist. But there are people out there who are like first in line for the new thing, technologically speaking. Like they want the Wi-Fi in the car. They want the Bluetooth in their refrigerator. They want every single new thing that comes out the day it comes out. And yes, I agree to being tracked and traced and monitored and algorithmatized and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so I almost, it's funny because you would almost need like a kind of virtual reality machine to do it. But I would like to, without actually giving up all of my information and everything, I'd almost like to be able to step into the life of someone who has done all of that stuff just to like feel what that world is like. Like having a smart home, for instance. I don't know what that's like, but I know that it must be a fairly fundamentally different experience from the way I'm living with my house. And it's only going to continue to be more different. I think the idea that you're going to be able to communicate with your home and with your car and actually do things with the communicative ability, that's just not a world I live in.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, as the technology becomes more and more ubiquitous and more sophisticated, the difference in experience, how's that going to be different between me and someone like that? We're almost to the point where we're living different lives.
Here's a simple analogy, or not even a simple analogy. So my car has lane assist. It has what do you call it? The dynamic control, like dynamic cruise control.
Mm.
My car will tell me, hey, maybe you should pull off to the side of the road. You're driving erratically. Get a coffee.
Well,
My car will, for lengths of time, drive without me driving it. Like it will put me back in lane if I start swerving because I'm falling asleep at the wheel, shit like that. I've made it back to Cleveland from Pittsburgh entirely because of like those particular technological advances in my vehicle. Now, I ultimately give up control of my vehicle to those things in many ways. But given how my lifestyle has played out in certain ways, it also has been, it's kept me alive. We'll just put it that way.
right.
So it's frustrating. It's like, as awesome as that is, I also understand that I'm giving up control of my life to a machine.
Well, if his truck had been equipped with the technology you're talking about, Mercer never would have died.
Exactly.
And that's real. We've had a conversation in our little discussion circle with the university group with Brett Venat and his ilk, his cohort. You and I have been involved in discussions talking about the trade-offs between like safety and safetyism versus autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's true. Like, yes, this technology will make people safer, but is the human being a creature that is fundamentally destined, for lack of a better term, to pursue safety and nothing but safety? Is that why we're here, to make life safe? And it's not immediately obvious that the answer is yes, despite the fact that many people would immediately say yes, or at least their actions imply that that's what they believe.
Well, and this also it was interesting because there's almost this sort of contradiction in a lot of people's perspectives on this. If you believe like Elon Musk does, that we have a huge population collapse problem coming, then safetyism is probably pretty important because you want to keep the people alive that you can keep alive to keep human race going. Mm-hmm. What's interesting is the number of people that would probably not believe that, think that we have an overpopulation problem, and them signing on to keep more people alive seems like a non-issue. But I would also argue a lot of those people that say that, what do you actually see them doing? They're more concerned about vaccines and things like that on net perhaps aren't keeping people alive as well as they should be.
Yeah, well, and of course, all of this, be it medical technology or be it the sort of I guess entertainment technology would be the wide umbrella under which I would classify the tech in this movie. All of it, I think, leads to a general softening of human beings. Mm-hmm. Now, the less time you spend in the world, the more time your body and your mind, I think, are, like I said earlier, kind of being turned into pudding. Mm-hmm. And that's not good, in my opinion.
I have a very puddingy body here. That's very true.
We're humans, people, our ancestors used to friggin' wrestle lions and shit. We are built fundamentally to incur risk and injury, and then to heal and to pass that information on. But fundamentally, we are earthlings and animals with a mind that is, I would say, somewhat unique. But nonetheless, we are still tethered to this planet. And there is a sort of existence that human beings have that's tied to this planet. And yet nowadays, because, and for a long time, our technology has been playing this progressive game implicitly, whispering into our ears saying, hey, wouldn't it be nice if we were like kind of not earthlings anymore? Hey, wouldn't it be nice if you didn't need to be like that animal meat sack that you carry around? Wouldn't it be nice if the mind could transcend the body? It's this little devil, this technological devil whispering into our ear. And I'm not even saying that it's necessarily an incorrect position, but what I am saying is that a lot of people
really
just
need to think about it more than we do.
Right. We're just not even having the conversation. It's like, well, maybe we are like a visceral primal being and maybe we should stay that. And that's got other implications of its own that maybe aren't so great. I don't know. But that's the conversation I want to have. And I did an episode for my show a couple months ago at this point, talking all about technology and stuff and transhumanism. And I played this clip from a Terence McKenna talk, who's obviously like huge transhumanist guy. And he says explicitly, he's like, look, this is the point. The whole point of human existence is to transcend matter. There it is. And how do you do that? Well, you upload your consciousness into some kind of basically nanobot cloud, which turns you into a cosmic being. That was his position. That's what we're doing. The goal of progress is to transcend material existence.
I don't want to be a cosmic being. I can say that much.
Yeah. Well, I would say you can't be.
I mean,
whatever.
Even if you could, like, I'm not going to sign up for that. So clear.
Right. It seems like, I don't know. It seems like a scam for one thing. But this idea, like, you can upload your consciousness into a computer one day and then you can transcend death. Like, even before we get into the cosmic being stuff, the next step of transhumanism, Kurzweil talks about it. I think McKenna probably talked about it too. All these dudes talk about uploading consciousness. Musk, the Neuralink. In that same episode I mentioned, he also mentioned one day we're going to be able to upload consciousness onto hard drives. And I'm like, okay, I don't know that that's consciousness. I don't know, whatever you're pulling out of me, I don't know that the result in that computer over there is going to still be me or my awareness or anything like that. Because
it's all based on the fact that at least part of us is electronic. It's electronic impulses being transferred on a very, very well conceived of network inside of us. But we don't know that that's all it is.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, there's people I think that want that to be all there is for sure. But any last minute thoughts you want to get out on here about this movie? Like, in general, I thought it's a fun movie. Whereas Midsummer was a lot to get through for me. This one is just a fun romp, and I think I was actually surprised at how long this movie was.
Yeah,
and how I never really felt like, oh, this movie's going on forever. It's just like, oh wow, I can't believe that took that long.
Yeah, that stood out to me too. At first, I was like, oh Jesus Christ, this is like a friggin' marathon movie when I just looked at the time of it. But when the last 10 minutes came up, I was like, aw.
I mean,
I want it to be longer.
It's one of those movies where it's just running from beginning to end. Like, shit just keeps happening. The scene's constantly changing, and there's just a constant movement, which is deceptive in that way.
Yeah, it's fun. That's really the way to put it. And like, honestly, a lot of, like I said before, I didn't at the beginning see where it was going to go, but like the big reveal of his buddy being the bad guy, like I called that pretty early on.
Yeah.
But even still,
they paint him that way pretty early on. Yeah. Like, he's just a skeezy guy.
Yeah, you could tell.
I don't know that I would have necessarily painted him as like the murderer, but I definitely would have painted him as like someone who's trying to lead him in the misdirection. And, they've got a few moments where they actually show how he was misguiding him in various ways. And
right. And so that one of those moments is, I guess, the one point I do want to make sure we get into the record here. He suggests a conspiracy. So our hero, Nero, Lenny, he's trying to put together who's the killer, blah, blah, blah. And his buddy...
Who shall not be named, by the way.
Yeah. Well, his buddy, who turns out to be the bad guy, says, "Oh well, there are these death squads out there that are basically cops who are sick of the bureaucratic slog of trying to actually deal out justice. And so they're kind of taking the law into their own hands. There are these like extra legal killers going around, and it's a conspiracy, and it goes higher up than you could ever imagine, and blah, 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 implying that there's this like kind of totalitarian element looming in the society and cleaning up wherever it needs to. And this is part of a plot that you couldn't possibly understand. That turns out to not be true. It turns out to just be chaos. And the conspiracy theory was designed by one of the chaotic members of the problem, what's going on here. It's just a way of distracting. It's a red herring.
And what is the whole thing about? We like so many people like in the quote unquote conspiracy movement exist as nothing more than ways to poison the well.
Yeah.
Like, are these people really believe this shit, or are they just here? I mean, Alex Jones in a lot of ways. There's like a lot of people that say like there's the point in time when you could like trust a lot of what he says, and then a point in time where it's like it feels like he only existed to delegitimize people that might have real research on their side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and the way he does that is often by painting with too broad of a brush this monolithic conspiracy, which is what the bad guy in the movie does. It's like, oh, it's part of this one thing. Whereas, in my opinion, I don't know that this is like what's going on in the movie is a conspiracy, as I would see. It's just not what most people think of as a conspiracy. It's a bunch of discrete and various interests conspiring together in a disconnected way to make life terrible. Like it's a chaos conspiracy in a way.
I mean, and I've said it before, when we look at the people that want to believe that there's some large Christian cabal that's, the Satanist cabal that's like leading the world to hell. Mm-hmm. It's like, to me, the thing that always seems to ring the true is like, no, man, I mean, there's just really wealthy people that think about life and humanity differently because of their perspective. You can only control problems at this level. Well, they can control problems at like a macro level we can't even possibly comprehend because of their level of wealth. They can pay countries to move and shit like that. So they're problem solving in a different world. But because our world and our world are so disconnected, I mean, like, I think the humans being humans satisfies all the requirements. It doesn't need to be an overarching thing where, oh, there's us and them and they're all leading us on the path. I think that, I guess, whether or not that's the truth, it's the truth in one way, but the perhaps the ill intent is not necessarily there and the malice like we think it is.
Right. What we get is the result of certain interests conspiring when it's convenient and then not conspiring when it's inconvenient. And a great example in the movie is the bad guy, the supposed friend of Lenny. He's conspiring with this record label guy until he's not, the whole time it's a conspiracy in the literal sense, but then it turns out that he's got his own agenda. Mm-hmm. So then 86 is the guy. That's the way these things will go often. Look at U.S. foreign policy, like, oh, well, America was conspiring with Saddam until it wasn't. That's the way these things go. So in the movie, and we can close on this, but in the movie, if there is a conspiracy, it's an organic conspiracy where everyone, whether they realize it or not, are conspiring to turn the world into a less organic, more edited, synthetic place in which even something so visceral as like sex is reduced to like the sex machine in Demolition Man. Nothing is real. Everything is mediated through technology, which is created by someone else, which is an inherently emasculating process. Everything is mediated by someone else. And yeah, the one person who's kind of crying out against it is his buddy Macy, and she's cool. I like her. So that's my
It's
thoughts.
terrible. You got me going on a whole other thing. I'm thinking about even television at the point in time that this is on TV, as we shifted towards the reality TV would have been happening at this point in time. MTV was no longer music videos at this point. It was becoming real world, roll rules, challenge kind of shit, which is a very edited, plastic, real life.
Right. Right. And it's telling you, and especially if you're a young person, it's like, hey, this is what your life is supposed to look like. This is what life is supposed to, this is real life, which gives people who then can reflect on their own home life, say, oh, well, my family's incorrect. What we're doing is wrong because the TV is the norm and what I'm doing is weird.
Well, and nothing is more obvious about that. What was the statement that they'd make on Real World back in the day? When people stop being polite and start being real.
Aha. Right. Yeah, the packaging, the manufacturing, packaging, and sale of real. That's real. Reality has been a product for a long time.
What's the old Dave Chappelle bit when keeping it real goes wrong?
I don't think I remember that one.
You
Is
never
it from
watched? It's from Chappelle's show back in the day.
Okay.
And it's the moment where like the guy, picks the fight because I got to keep it real, and then gets his ass beat because what he thought was an easy, victory. The guy's like a 10th level black belt that you don't know about, and like beat your ass 10 ways past Sunday. It's just the idea of what is real, kind of being very not what is the way most people would actually act. So
well, it's also I sorry,
you're
but
good.
it's also this concept of real. I've encountered this with people my whole life. This idea of real is really just an excuse to be a narcissistic asshole. Oh, I'm just real. I'm just telling it like it is. No, you're a prick, actually. That's not real. What the TV gave you is this kind of like angry, visceral, real thing. That's not actually what quote unquote real people do. Real people are constructive. Real people know how to interact with one another. And it just drives me crazy, this idea that using honesty and reality is really just an excuse to be a piece of shit. I'm sure we all have stories about that. So
what's actually funny about that is that in that setting, what is the end goal of getting people acting like that? Is to push us farther apart from each other. Part of being real is understanding that we have to deal with each other on a daily basis.
Right.
And so
it's culturally destructive.
Yes, absolutely. Have you given any thought to what we're going to be looking at next time?
Oh my God.
Just for the record, I think I had a list of at least 25 movies deep that I can go, and then another one I thought of the other day. Okay. I don't know if I sent you a link for, but what are you thinking?
Well, see, my whole pool to pull from is almost too cliched, Soylent Green, Demolition Man. We could probably, I love those movies, but we could probably do something a little different because those are just too easy. So I'm curious to hear what you've got in mind.
Honestly,
you probably have something I've never even heard of. So.
I can guarantee you've never heard of this next movie. It's Russian, actually.
Oh,
has Jeffrey Tambor in it.
Okay.
I posted, I believe, a trailer to it in the School Sucks group that we're in, and it's called Branded.
Okay.
And it is very specifically, we figured the algorithm out. How much is it worth to you to be able to control all the people's minds? And through the movie, you're watching people will stop at McDonald's and then they get these bubbly things that protrude out of their back up into the sky like giant billboards.
Wow.
The whole movie is about where technology and understanding of human behavior and branding of a corporation, say, food company, where that kind of all crosses. And it's definitely a sci-fi movie, which is an interesting way to approach that.
Okay. I'd be into that.
I'm pitching it mostly because I really want to watch the movie again. It's been a long time since I've seen it, and it was, I think it came out in like maybe 2012, something
Okay.
like that. And it's a well produced movie. Visually, it's interesting as hell, but it's touching on something I don't know that we've touched on yet.
All right, I'd be into that. And I did remember there was one that I wanted to do. So maybe we can do that after you said it's called Branded.
Yes.
Okay. Pi, Pi. It's like a
I think
black
that
and
came
white
up on
night.
my list. I never actually watched that.
Okay, that would be a good one to do. Uh, I don't really even remember it all that well, but it's definitely like a tech kind of like computers getting into the mind of man kind of movie. And I think that it would be I just remember like thinking when I saw it years ago, I should watch this again sometime
Hmm.
more attentively. So maybe we could do that one after Branded.
All right. Let me see here. You said pie.
Yes, PI. It must have come out in like 95 or something, I want to say. I don't know specifically, but
Is it pie? Is in like capital P, lowercase I?
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Interesting.
It's
Yeah, I'll look that one up too.
there's one of the actors is like very recognizable. He's in all kinds of stuff. He's in Breaking Bad.
Mm-hmm.
He's the old wheelchair bell ringing guy in Breaking Bad. But he's in that
Nice.
movie, and yeah. So okay, it sounds like we've got a little bit of a schedule as to what we can do.
Yeah, I
That's
mean,
good.
like I sat down one day and just started laying out all of my favorite sci-fi movies that I want to talk about with you,
Awesome.
and it went a lot longer. Okay, let me see. I literally just pulled it up here. I think I did up through 51 with so it's half that we'll just say, because I left every other one open for you.
Okay.
I mean, let's see here some of my favorites. Johnny Mnemonic, Children of Men, 13th Floor, RoboCop, Demolition Man, Minority Report, Antiviral, Snowpiercer, Dark City, District 9, Bicentennial Man, Gattaca, 12 Monkeys, THX 1138, Logan's Run, Rollerball, The Fifth Element, Total Recall, Running Man, They Live, The Fly, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Brazil, Zero Theorem, Existence is another one I really want to get to. I should probably move that up in the list. But
Okay. Yeah. So I now that you're like reading off the list, I'm thinking of other stuff that I would like to do. It's not like this, and it would be nice because these aren't like sci-fi movies. It's a kind of different vein, although I think it's important.
well,
Um,
Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is one that's like I don't think of it as a sci-fi movie, but that whole thing is based on technology for sure.
mhm.
Like the main tenet is, hey, we found a way to remove memories of bad relationships. That's a
Yeah.
pretty important detail.
There are some good like 70s conspiracy type movies, which I think would be fun to do. Of course, the old staple is like All the President's Men, but there's Parallax View. That would be a fun one to do. Um, Marathon Man. Um, there are some other ones. I know we talked about The Whistleblower would maybe be one to do at
You
some
had
point.
mentioned that one.
Yeah. So that stuff is all more like intelligence agency kind of stuff, which I enjoy because it's kind of pointing at something that is always going on in the background of our day-to-day lives. We think of government as this kind of nice representative organization, which is, yeah, it has our best interests in mind, but it's incompetent. It's like, all right, but look, there are these things called intelligence agencies that have been around for quite a while, and you don't really know what they're up to, but they're everywhere. And so I like movies that kind of call that out. So it'd be fun to do that.
I'm not against that. I would almost suggest something like that we maybe do bonus episodes or something like that with it. The reason I suggest that is because our our lowest downloaded episode definitely was the what do you call it? Midsummer so far.
Okay, yeah. We got to stick to the tech stuff.
Try and keep it sci-fi as much as possible, maybe. Like
All
I
right.
said, I'm all about having those conversations. I'm
Mhm.
just, I think that more of those are going to be more for the people that are like really, really interested in this.
Right. Right. I'm good with that.
So, and just for the record, I'm working on setting it up. We have the Dystopian Society, which is, specifically, all I'm asking if people you want to give me your email, I'll have eventually have a link for you. I have a separate feed which will have all of the bonus content. Don't have to pay for it, nothing like that. Just make it so that we can contact you about stuff in the future, because, well, let's be honest, I don't know how long we'll be able to continue having these conversations. We were kicked off of what do you call it, BitChute, which blows my mind. Like all the crazy shit that goes on there, and we got kicked off of BitChute. But
Right.
we are definitely on what do you call it, Rumble. We're on Odyssey. You can watch the video versions of us there and there. We are on YouTube. I haven't had any issues with us on YouTube yet. But we actually, like you said, I do have a separate feed that if you send me your email address, I will get you the feed. You can put in your RSS downloader and listen to us on any podcatcher that does RSS.
Make sure you do it. We've already got some bonus stuff
I mean, and
about the circle.
we still need to have episode 3 on this circle because
Right.
I'm curious about all that now.
Yes. So
So-
we're doing that for real. It's not just hot air. There's already bonus content, and there'll be more. Yeah, we should do it. We should schedule a bonus show here soon.
Absolutely. So, all right, folks. Thanks for coming in. Keep one eye over your shoulder and one on the screen.
Hell yeah. All right. Until next time.